The applause was loud enough to shake the room, but the seat reserved for my parents stayed empty. I stood at the edge of the stage in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd one last time, even though I already knew. Phones were raised. Families leaned forward. Pride was everywhere, just not for me. My phone buzzed. A short message, an excuse that sounded harmless if you didn't listen too closely. I slipped the phone into my pocket and smiled for the camera anyway. What they didn't know was that while they were shopping, something else in my life was about to go live and change everything. My name is Morgan Pierce, and for a long time, I told myself my parents didn't mean to miss the things that mattered to me. They were busy people. Practical people. The kind who believed responsibilities came in visible forms: errands to run, appearances to maintain, plans that felt productive because they looked productive. I learned early not to demand attention. I learned to be flexible. Understanding. Easy. When I was accepted into law school, my mother hugged me and immediately asked how expensive tuition would be. My father said he was proud, then reminded me to stay realistic about the future. None of it was cruel. That was the hardest part. Their neglect never arrived loudly enough to confront it, slipped in quietly, disguised as reason. Over time, I became the dependable one. The child who didn't complain. If something conflicted with a family plan, I adjusted. If a milestone was overlooked, I told myself it wasn't intentional. I carried my achievements lightly, shrinking them just enough to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. Shopping trips, social events, casual plans, those never seemed optional. But my moments were flexible, postponable, replaceable. I convinced myself that love didn't require presents, that pride didn't need witnesses. Graduation was supposed to be different, not because I needed applause, but because it marked the end of years spent proving I could endure quietly. Standing there in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd, waiting for familiar faces that didn't appear, something shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, and I had finally stopped pretending not to see it. When my name was called, I stood and walked toward the stage with my shoulders back, the fabric of my gown brushing against my legs. Applause filled the auditorium, warm, generous, meant for everyone, but it felt strangely distant, like it belonged to a room just beyond my reach. I scanned the crowd anyway. Old habit. Rows of smiling parents leaned forward with phones raised, eyes shining. There were hugs waiting, flowers clutched too tightly, pride made visible. My parents' seats were empty. I accepted the diploma with both hands and smiled for the camera, holding the expression just long enough to look natural. From a distance, I probably appeared calm. Composed, the version of Morgan Pierce everyone expected to see. Up close, there was a quiet hollowness settling in my chest, not sharp enough to break me, but heavy enough to change the way I breathed. I returned to my seat and sat through the rest of the ceremony, clapping when appropriate, standing when told. I didn't leave early. I didn't look for substitutes in the crowd. I didn't explain myself to anyone who asked where my family was. I wasn't interested in softening the truth or making it easier for other people to understand. When the final applause rose and caps flew into the air, I stayed where I was for a moment, letting the noise pass through me. This was still my achievement. Still my ending. Still something I had earned without witnesses. As I walked out of the hall alone, diploma pressed against my side, I understood something clearly. Absence leaves a shape. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I had just stepped into the quiet hallway outside the auditorium when my phone vibrated again. Not the phone my parents had. The other one. The one tied to a life I kept deliberately separate. I stopped walking and leaned against the cool wall, my cap still crooked, the echo of applause fading behind me. "Morgan," the voice said, low and controlled but edged with something unmistakable. Relief. "We're clear." I closed my eyes. "All of it?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "All of it," my partner replied. "Final approvals came through this morning. The deal is locked. We're scheduled to go live this afternoon." For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing. Years of late nights, quiet risks, conversations held in code, and work I never explained at family dinners, all of it had led to this call, made in a hallway that still smelled like polished floors and celebration. How public. I ask. Fully, she said. Press release, platform launch, dashboards. Once it's live, there's no separating your name from it. I looked down at my gown, the fabric wrinkled from sitting, the diploma still warm in my hands. 2 milestones, colliding in the same hour. One acknowledged by strangers, the other missed by the people who raised me. Okay, I said finally. Let's proceed. When the call ended, I didn't cheer. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stood there, grounded by the weight of what I had built in silence. My parents didn't know about this call, they didn't know what was about to go live. And for the first time, I realized how much of my life existed beyond their line of sight. By the time I stepped outside, the afternoon had shifted. The sky was brighter, the air sharper, the city moving with its usual impatience, unaware that something personal had just crossed a threshold. I sat on a low stone wall across from the building and opened my laptop, the graduation tassel still brushing my wrist. The internal dashboard refreshed once. Then again, green indicators began to stack across the screen. Activation confirmed. Partners connected. User numbers climbing in real time. The deal wasn't just approved anymore, it was alive. Somewhere downtown, servers hummed and systems adjusted, carrying my name in metadata and legal lines I'd read 100 times but never out loud. My phone started buzzing. Not messages yet, alerts. Automated confirmations, press notifications queued for release. A headline preview slid across the screen, clean and restrained, exactly the way I'd insisted it be. No drama. No spectacle. Just facts. Across the city, screens changed. In office lobbies, cafes, and places where people paused without meaning to, the same update appeared. A launch announcement. A quiet but unmistakable shift. I didn't need to see it to know it was happening. I could feel it in the way the alerts kept coming, steady and precise. I thought of my parents then, not with bitterness but distance. I imagined them standing in a store aisle, hands full, eyes drawn upward as a screen updated without warning. I didn't picture their reaction in detail. I didn't need to. I closed my laptop and sat there for a moment longer, letting the magnitude settle. The deal had gone live without applause, without witnesses, without permission, and for the first time that day I understood how power actually moves quietly. All at once, and without waiting for anyone to be ready. The first call came 5 minutes after the deal went live. I didn't answer it. Then another. And another. My phone lit up in quick succession, the screen filling with names I hadn't seen earlier that day. Messages followed, short at first, casual, as if nothing had happened. Are you still nearby? We just saw something on the news. The tone shifted quickly. Curiosity sharpened into urgency. Pride slipped in where concern had been absent. I watched it unfold without touching the phone, noticing how recognition traveled faster once it had proof to carry. A longer message came through from my mother, this one carefully worded. She said she hadn't realized how big everything was. She said they were proud. She said they wanted to celebrate me now. I read it once, then set the phone face down beside me. Nothing about me had changed in the last hour. Not my work, not my values. Not the years I'd spent building something quietly, in rooms where no one was watching. The only difference was visibility. A screen. A headline. A number large enough to demand attention. That was the part that settled uncomfortably in my chest. I thought back to the empty seats at the ceremony. To the ease with which errands had replaced presents, and I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. My success hadn't earned their attention, it had triggered it. When I finally picked up the phone, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt distant. Recognition that arrives late carries a different weight. It doesn't heal what was missed. It only reveals what it took to be seen. I didn't respond right away. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood. I was deciding what deserved access to me and what no longer did. They wanted to meet that evening. That was made clear in the messages that followed, suggestions at first, then insistence, wrapped in excitement and relief. We should all sit down together. This is something we should celebrate as a family. The urgency felt misplaced, as if timing could retroactively fix absence. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Not to punish anyone. I simply didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. For years, I had narrated my choices, softened my boundaries, offered context before anyone asked. That night, I chose silence instead. I went home alone, changed out of my graduation clothes and folded the gown carefully, not as something sacred but as something complete. I made a simple dinner, opened my notebook, and began outlining next steps, calls to schedule, contracts to finalize, people to hire. The future moved forward whether my parents were ready for it or not. My phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up the room every few minutes. I let it. The boundary didn't need an announcement. It didn't require a speech or a confrontation. It existed because I stopped crossing it for other people. Later, as the city quieted outside my window, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed anymore. I felt steady. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement before allowing myself to rest. I wasn't negotiating my worth. I had drawn a line simply by staying where I was and not moving to meet anyone else halfway. We met 3 days later at a quiet cafe near the river, the kind of place chosen for neutrality. No crowds. No cameras. My parents arrived together, sitting across from me with the careful posture of people who believed this conversation would go a certain way if they chose the right words. They started with apologies. Measured ones. My mother said they hadn't understood how important everything was. My father nodded, adding that they never imagined the deal would be that significant. I let them speak without interrupting, noticing how often the word deal appeared and how rarely graduation did. When there was a pause, I spoke. This isn't about the numbers, I said evenly. And it's not about the press. They looked surprised, as if I'd changed the subject without warning. I needed you there before any of this was impressive, I continued. Not because I required validation, but because showing up matters when no one else is watching. My mother reached for her cup, then stopped. My father shifted in his chair. The control they'd expected to maintain the rhythm of explanation and reassurance had slipped. They tried to explain again. Schedules. Misjudgments. Priorities. I listened, then set my boundary clearly. I'm not asking for sudden enthusiasm, I said. I'm asking for consistency. If you want to be part of my life, it can't depend on whether there's something to celebrate publicly. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was unfamiliar. For the first time, the balance in the conversation felt even. They weren't managing my feelings. And I wasn't managing theirs. When we stood to leave, there was no resolution tied with a promise. Just an understanding, quiet, unsettled, and real, that things would only move forward if they changed how they showed up. The first public interview happened a week later, in a room that smelled faintly of coffee and new paint. Cameras were positioned carefully, lights adjusted to soften edges. I sat straight in my chair, hands folded loosely in my lap, listening as the host outlined my background: law school, the launch, the deal that had gone live with quiet precision. When the questions turned technical, I answered easily. I spoke about structure, responsibility, and why sustainability mattered more to me than speed. I could feel the room relax as the conversation settled into something familiar and professional. Then the host tilted his head slightly and asked the question everyone eventually asks. How did your family react to all of this? The room stilled. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I thought about the empty seats at graduation, the messages that came too late, and the calm that followed once I stopped explaining myself. When I spoke, my voice was steady. I've been supported by the people who showed up, I said. My team. My partners. And, over time, myself. There was no edge to it. No bitterness. Just truth. The host nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further. The cameras kept rolling, but something had shifted. I wasn't there to correct a story or defend a choice. I was there to define the narrative on my own terms. After the interview ended, a producer thanked me quietly. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the glass buildings and reflected light back into the street. I paused for a moment before walking on, aware of how different this felt from the ceremony days earlier. This time, I wasn't waiting to be recognized. I had already claimed the space. Once the interviews ended and the notifications slowed, life found its rhythm again. Not the chaotic kind driven by attention, but a quieter pace shaped by intention. Mornings filled with planning meetings and long-term decisions. Afternoons disappeared into work that didn't make headlines but made progress. My family adjusted in small, uneven ways. My parents checked in more often, their messages careful, less assumptive. Sometimes they asked about my work. Sometimes they simply asked how I was. I noticed the effort without rushing to reward it. Change, I'd learned, needed time to prove itself. Others faded. Distant relatives who had surfaced briefly during the excitement drifted back into silence. I didn't chase them. I didn't feel the need to explain why access had changed. The noise had done its job revealing who was present for the moment and who was present for me. At home, the reminders of graduation slowly disappeared. The cap went into a box. The program slid into a drawer. In their place were outlines for upcoming projects, lists of names I wanted to mentor, goals that pointed forward instead of back. I found myself thinking less about what had been missed and more about what had been gained. Not the deal. Not the visibility. But the freedom that came from no longer measuring myself against someone else's attention. The applause had faded, but something steadier remained. A sense of alignment, of direction. I wasn't proving anything anymore. I was building, quietly and deliberately, a life that didn't pause for permission and didn't need witnesses to move forward. The diploma still sits in a frame on my shelf, but it no longer feels like the defining moment of that season. It represents effort, discipline, and years of commitment, but it isn't what changed me. The real graduation came later, quietly, without ceremony or applause. It arrived the moment I stopped waiting for my parents to see me before allowing myself to move forward. When I understood that my life didn't need an audience to be valid, something settled into place. I learned that achievement doesn't demand witnesses, and self-respect doesn't ask permission. Some people will only show up once there's something to point at, something impressive enough to justify their attention. That truth used to hurt. Now it simply informs my choices. I didn't cut anyone out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I moved on with clarity instead of resentment, intention instead of apology. That was the real graduation. Not from school but from the need to be seen in order to stand tall. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Standing up quietly, without anger or revenge, wasn't easy but it was necessary. If you've ever felt overlooked, minimized, or valued only when your success became visible, know this: your worth isn't measured by who shows up late. Set boundaries before bitterness sets in. Build even when no one is watching. And don't wait for permission to respect yourself. Share your perspective in the comments. Do you think I handled this the right way? What would you have done differently? Your voice matters here. If you believe stories like this can help others feel less alone, please like, subscribe, and engage with the channel. Every comment, every share helps these lessons reach someone who needs them today.